You're watching Reality Check. The opening day of Donald Trump's first visit to India was meant to provide the perfect optics for the growing bro-mance between the American president and our Prime Minister. But the mega welcome in Motera in Ahmedabad was overshadowed by spiraling violence in Delhi linked to the protests against the Citizenship Bill, which seeks to fast-track citizenship to all religions except Muslims. Just hours earlier, both Mr. Modi and Mr. Trump were at Sabarmati Ashram to pay respects to India's enduring symbol of interfaith peace, Mahatma Gandhi. Later, both took the stage at a packed-to-capacity cricket stadium where they spoke of India's tradition of religious tolerance. Let's listen.
India is a country that proudly embraces freedom, liberty, individual rights, the rule of law, and the dignity of every human being.
आज आप विविधता से भरे उस भारत में हैं जहां सैकड़ों भाषाएं बोली जाती हैं, सैकड़ों तरह के परिधान हैं, सैकड़ों तरह के खान-पान हैं, अनेकों पंथ और समुदाय हैं। हमारी ये रिच डाइवर्सिटी में यूनिटी और यूनिटी की वाइब्रेंसी भारत और अमेरिका के बीच मजबूत रिश्ते का बहुत बड़ा आधार है। एक लैंड ऑफ द फ्री है तो दूसरा पूरे विश्व को एक परिवार मानता है।
Of course, Trump being Trump, in the speech there was the by now familiar reference to Islamic extremism.
The United States and India are also firmly united in our ironclad resolve to defend our citizens from the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. Both of our countries have been hurt by the pain and turmoil of terrorism.
But just as these speeches were winding up, violence in Delhi was flaring. The junior Minister of Home says vested interests are behind the escalating violence during the Trump visit. But who could be escalating it? Could it be this leader from Mr. Modi's own party who 24 hours ago, flanked by the police, openly issued an ultimatum that the police have till the end of the Trump visit to break up the anti-CAA protests or else?
मैं आप सबके बिहाफ पे ये बात कह रहा हूँ, ट्रंप के जाने तक तो हम शांति से जा रहे हैं, लेकिन उसके बाद हम आपकी भी नहीं सुनेंगे अगर रास्ते खाली नहीं हुए तो। ठीक है? ट्रंप के जाने तक आप जाफराबाद और चांदबाग खाली करवा लीजिए, ऐसी आपसे विनती कर रहे हैं। उसके बाद हमें रोड पे आना पड़ेगा।
Now, was this leader arrested or even reprimanded? Of course not. Instead, a day later, today, the violence has worsened and the police seem adrift. Look at these videos of one of the protesters walking with a gun towards a policeman before he turns and fires seemingly into a rival group. We have multiple angles, in fact, of this video which shows you the impunity with which protesters were walking and brandishing guns right in Delhi as the police appeared to struggle to contain the situation. This is the top angle of the same video of the protester with a gun approaching the policeman and then firing bullets. Now, one policeman has been killed in the violence, another senior police official injured. A civilian too has been reported killed because of head injuries. Much of the violence is reported from East Delhi's Shahdara area near the sites of a number of anti-CAA sit-ins which have by and large been peaceful. But attempts to break up these protest sites by the police and by those supporting the act, including by those linked to the ruling party, have triggered wave after wave of retaliatory violence. Shops, motorcycles, buses, and petrol stations are burnt. Just look at this video that we're about to play for you, which will give you an idea of the extent of the violence that has gripped India's capital city. Mobs pelting stones from both sides of the divide. Vehicles, as I said, set on fire. The situation still simmering. The police claim that matters are being brought under control, but reports on the ground suggest that things remain tense. It's into this New Delhi that Donald Trump and Melania Trump will arrive tonight before they begin to talk diplomacy tomorrow. Joining us tonight on the show, we have with us Suketu Mehta, who is a writer, most recently of a book on immigrants, This Land is My Land. He's also a journalism professor at NYU. We also have with us Mehdi Hassan, who's a columnist at The Intercept and also anchors shows for Al Jazeera. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Suhasini Haider, national editor and diplomatic affairs editor of The Hindu, and Preeti Davra, spokesperson for Howdy Modi and a columnist on Asia Affairs. Suketu Mehta, let me start with you. I know you must be heartbroken that you couldn't be in your native state of Gujarat to welcome your two favorite world leaders. I was looking to see if I could spot you in the crowds at Motera Stadium. But you are, of course, at the moment you told me in Amsterdam. But Suketu, now tell me, you actually wrote a piece for Time magazine on the Modi visit, on the Trump visit rather, where in a sense you foreshadowed what we are seeing today, where you said that quite beyond this idea that we heard about religious tolerance from both these leaders, but Trump and Modi do not reflect the spirit of Gujarat. What did you mean by that?
That's correct, Vasu. And yes, I was expecting my invitation too. I missed those joke clubs, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. I did write a piece in Time, which is online today. And in it, there's 50 million Gujaratis, and not all of us agree with Trump or Modi. In fact, 87% of Indian Americans didn't vote for Trump in the last presidential elections. And I think the majority of us are also not going to vote for him in this elections. So as I see it, this whole exercise in howdy Trump or Kem Cho Modi or whatever iteration of these greetings, it's aimed at getting the votes and money of people like me, Gujaratis in America. It's aimed at convincing us that Trump isn't our natural enemy, in spite of the fact that he has severely reduced legal immigration, including H-1B visas. He's put severe restrictions for them.
Right.
Lines are longer than ever before. This is not our friend, and we shouldn't be welcoming him in Ahmedabad.
And what specifically is it about Trump and Modi that you have a problem with, and which you've also written about in your piece? Because you, in a sense, you draw a line between Trump's policies of immigration, which you say are directed particularly against Muslim citizens from certain countries, and the CAA, which is currently the cause of unrest here.
So all over the world, there's this upsurge in this kind of populism, which is built on hatred of migrants. So Trump hates Mexicans just like Modi seems to hate Bangladeshis. And both of them are united in their dislike of Muslims and Islam. And in both these cases, it poses a danger in America. Hate crimes against Muslims have been rising dramatically. And it certainly poses an existential danger to Indian democracy. I don't think there's been a moment in India's history as an independent nation where there's been such grave threat to the constitution.
Right.
Never in India's history is one religion being singled out in an act of parliament as unworthy of entrance to the country. And this is a country which is 15% Muslim. It's going to go to 20% in a few decades. We are alienating an enormous chunk of the country, and besides, it's undemocratic.
Right. Okay. Mehdi Hassan, it was interesting to actually have Trump come and talk about religious tolerance and religious freedom in India. And I know that this is increasingly a contested idea, that countries, leaders from the West come and sort of lecture our part of the world on maintaining these values. But increasingly, with leaders like Trump, that moral authority, questionable as it may be, is increasingly wearing thin.
You're right, Srinivasan. On the one hand, there'll be a lot of people disappointed that Donald Trump had so little to say about the anti-Muslim legislation that's already been mentioned, the attacks on minorities, not just Muslims, but on Christians. Trump claims to be a great defender of Christianity. You have Indian Christians attacked pilgrims just earlier this month in Tamil Nadu. So I think you'll have a lot of people disappointed that the President of the United States didn't have anything to say, and you kind of illustrated it with the juxtaposition of those clips you played at the start of the show, where he's talking about freedom and the rule of law, and then you're seeing the violence in Delhi, which the police can do or doesn't seem to want to stop. So I think there's a problem on the one hand where the American president doesn't have the moral authority, doesn't want to say anything about religious freedom. On the other hand, if he does have something to say about religious freedom, it would sound hypocritical, wouldn't it, Srinivasan? Is Donald Trump really the man to lecture Narendra Modi on Islamophobia? I mean, Modi and Trump are united in their Islamophobia. Trump and Modi are two of the world's best-known promoters of anti-Muslim bigotry. Trump through his Muslim ban and other measures and his obsession with Muslim terrorists. And, of course, Modi with the camps in Assam, with Kashmir, with this CAA, which singles out Muslim refugees apart from other groups. So, in one sense, they have everything in common. Why would they criticize each other? And I have to say one thing here. Narendra Modi is a political genius in terms of inviting Trump here, because this is what Trump loves. This is the spectacle, the crowds. It's what the Saudis did when he was elected, Srinivasan. He went first to Saudi Arabia, not to Canada or Mexico, to sword dance with the Saudi royals. And here he is in Motera with 110,000 people. This is what Trump lives for, not for politics, not for economics.
Right. But at the same time, Suhasini, from what we understood from some of those briefings, from the White House briefings just ahead of the Trump visit, it appears that Mr. Trump is going to bring up CAA and is going to bring up religious freedoms and perhaps even Kashmir in the talks tomorrow. The irony of it, I think, is lost on no one.
I think so, and I do agree that I don't think Mr. Trump is very comfortable raising issues that he himself does not really have a problem with. In the past year, he has certainly mentioned his desire to mediate on Kashmir. He repeated not the mediation part, but the part about wanting a peaceful and prosperous South Asia, for India and Pakistan to bring down tensions in his speech at Motera. But some of those other issues that the U.S. administration officials had referred to, I think, over the weekend, which was a slightly strange briefing to give just as the president was leaving for India, where they said that, we're deeply concerned about religious freedoms in India, we're deeply concerned about the restrictions in Kashmir, and we intend to bring them up. I don't think Mr. Trump is as comfortable with that kind of intervention. Certainly not publicly.
Right.
Now, they may come up in the discussions. The Indian side has made it very clear that they're going to say this is an internal matter, as they have in the past.
Right. But, Preeti Zavra, you were involved with Howdy Modi as well, and now we've had this huge sort of show at Motera. Explain to us the rationale behind it. Is this just about the optics of it, that you basically put on a good show, there's this huge sort of event in Texas, and then President Trump comes down there. This is sort of quid pro quo that, as Mehdi Hasan was saying, that, this is something that Trump likes nothing better than to be waving at thousands of people. He was hoping for 7 or 10 million, which, as some have pointed out, is the entire population of Ahmedabad. Yeah. It's probably turned out to be about 100,000, which is still not a bad crowd.
Look, I think that I see this quite differently, obviously, and considering that I was one of the organizers of the Howdy Modi event, I can say quite confidently that the reason this event was organized was to strengthen U.S.-India ties.
Okay.
And I think it brought together for the very first time in history a U.S. president and Indian prime minister, and it was unprecedented in that, and it was also unprecedented. When
you say brought together,
on one stage, okay. In a community, community summit.
Many similar meetings.
No, but it was a people's diplomacy. What was different was, you said, why was this event organized? What's it about? So I think the Howdy Modi Community Summit was just that. It was a community summit, 1,500 people who were astronauts, lawyers, CEO, artists. They came together for 8 weeks, right? And it was sort of their way of giving back and showcasing that they can play a small role in strengthening India-US ties.
That's fair enough. But in terms
it did.
Okay, but some would argue that India-US ties are already very strong and very deep. But in terms of concrete outcomes, it's unclear what what that's achieved, because India and America still remain at loggerheads over trade. In fact, in this particular visit, it's unlikely that there'll be a trade pact. The gentleman the trade secretary is actually not coming on this visit. And as Suketu was pointing out, there are serious issues about both countries raising barriers, whether it's to do with trade, whether it's to do with immigration.
But look, I think you're not taking into account the sentiment of millions of people in India and in the Indian Americans in America that see this as much more than just trade. Okay, so I think that this is a very different perspective.
What is that sentiment? What is it about? Why would Indian Americans be enamored of Donald Trump?
I think not enamored of Donald Trump, but to see such friendship, goodwill and trust between US and India as demonstrated through the two leaders
coming together.
No, but also their individual chemistry and what they're able to put together.
You were saying that in a sense that Howdy Modi was almost presented as sort of angling towards the Indian vote for Trump. I think Modi said something along the lines of Fir ek baar Trump sarkar. This is coming fairly close on the heels of an election year. But you're saying that that's really not the case. A large number of Indian Americans still remain staunchly Democrat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just our votes, but it's also our money, our campaign donations that Trump and the Republicans are craving. We are the richest single community in the country, and we are solidly democratic. In fact, we're the most democratic of all the Asian American community, and that's not likely to change. We know a charlatan when we see one. We know that Trump is not favorably disposed towards Indians or any kind of immigrants. In fact, his chief immigration advisor, Stephen Miller, is an out-and-out white supremacist. So, it's hogwash to say that somehow Trump hugging Modi will convince lots of Indian Americans, look, even we like Modi, so we're going to like whoever he hugs. This is not going to happen. And actually, many more Indian Americans have much more nuanced views about Modi. And in fact, the younger generation on the college campuses, etc., they out and out detest him and his policies. I don't think this has been covered enough by the press. I mean, there's this idea that Indian Americans and Gujaratis in general are universally behind Modi. That is not true, as I explained in my article.
Right. Mehdi, I want to ask you about, in a sense, the risks of this kind of, in a sense, politicking, where you have leaders holding events for other leaders. Now, as we know, in diplomacy, you're generally meant to be bipartisan. You're not supposed to tilt towards one side or the other.
Yes.
Is this a bit risky for both sides?
It is risky. It's a very good point, Srinivasan. And Trump has actually done this across the board. And he's done it for both geopolitical reasons. He's done it for domestic political reasons. He's done it for his own ego. So you take Israel, for example, where he's cozied up to the Netanyahu government so much that Democrats in Congress have started criticizing the Israeli prime minister in a way that they never would have done beforehand. The same with India, in a way that he's made it all about himself and Modi. If there is a Democrat president, if there is a President Sanders or Biden who comes in later this year, that's going to be a problem, of course, for Modi, who, as you say, was encouraging the re-election of Trump not so long ago. But this is how Trump operates. I would push back against the previous guest who said this is about India-America ties. It's not about India-America ties. This is very much about Modi and Trump. Trump doesn't care about anything else but himself. If Modi were to come out and criticize Trump tomorrow, the relationship would be dead in a second. You've seen how Trump treats European allies like Angela Merkel and others who have dared to criticize him. He doesn't give a damn about the America-Germany relationship now, which is supposedly such a strong relationship, because of his personal animosity with the leader of Germany. And so you have to understand everything in the context of Trump transactionally. I mean, this is a man, sorry, Srinivas, this is a man who went to Mahatma Gandhi's home today, and he signed the book saying, thank you to my great friend, Prime Minister Modi, for organizing this visit. No word about Gandhi himself. I mean, every previous American president mentions Gandhi in the book or at the meeting. Trump makes it about his own visit. This is his obsession. You see this with the Chinese president, with the Indian prime minister, with the prime minister of Israel. He makes it all very, very personal. And if there is a President Sanders, for example, coming down the line, that will be a problem for Modi, because unlike President Trump, a President Sanders would talk about Kashmir. Kashmir is under lockdown right now, and Trump has nothing to say about it.
Right. Subhashini, I just want to ask you, because you've been reporting extensively on the extent of almost bipartisan pushback, particularly in America, about what's been going on with Kashmir. And now, of course, CAA and all of that is adding more layers to that. Is this kind of wooing of Trump going to, in a sense, reduce some of that pressure on India, or are those just two very different silos?
Well, it really remains to be seen what happens tomorrow and what Mr. Trump does say. I think Mr. Trump has chosen to come to India despite all of the concerns within certainly his Congress, but even from members of his own party and some key advisors, like Mr. Lindsey Graham, who have written very, very strong letters to the president, to the House committee, to say there must be some kind of action on India. Remember, the most recent letter actually puts a timeline that the US administration has to come up with to show that India has actually taken action to lift restrictions in Kashmir. But will that have an impact on Mr. Trump or his relationship with Mr. Modi? I really don't think so.
Right.
And I think there is a distinct almost otherization of these views. We saw it with our own External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, when he went to the US. He chose not to meet the House Foreign Affairs Committee because it included the sponsor of the resolution critical of India, Pramila Jayapal. And it doesn't seem to have changed the India-US, the government-to-government relationship one bit.
Okay. Well, last word from you, Preeti Davra. What concrete outcome would you expect from this visit? I mean, we've sort of had the big spectacle, but beyond that, what do you think is
First
likely?
of all, let me just, since we organized Howdy Modi,
yes.
I don't know how people who were not involved in it at all can speak for it and say that it really was insignificant, because how can you explain in 8 weeks 50,000 people registered? They came from every state in America. Funding was raised, and this is not, this is for, the event was for Prime Minister Modi, and later President Trump was invited for it.
Sure.
So initially it was for him, and it shows his popularity amongst Indian Americans.
Okay.
How many Muslim Indian Americans or Christian Indian Americans were at the Howdy Summit out of interest?
Plenty.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, it was I personally worked with so many of them. And so I think you really
so in concrete outcomes,
this is a new paradigm of diplomacy. I don't know how this can be undermined.
Okay, but you still haven't answered my question, and
You're
I
really
literally
not
have 10
taking
seconds.
into account the masses in India,
No,
or the
specifically,
Indian Americans in America who are absolutely exuberant. I feel a sense of same optimism and hope that I felt at Howdy Modi. The seed was laid, this is germinated here.
Okay, but one concrete outcome from this visit.
The concrete outcome will come in the coming months. As you know, diplomacy is not about just today.
Okay, diplomacy.
This is a long game.
Okay, well.
And it's a paradigm shift.
All right, let's
Never
see.
before in history, it is a visual metaphor for where the relationship is headed.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see what exactly is on the cards tomorrow. But thank you all for joining me on Reality Check. You've been a great panel. Thanks so much for watching. That's all the time we have. Good night.